Hi, and welcome to today's webinar brought to you by Citrus Health Network in collaboration with the Early Learning Coalition of Miami-Dade and Monroe. Today's subject that we'll be discussing is sensitive in nature. And for some, it might bring up some emotions and thoughts of some past experiences. If at any time during the presentation you feel that you need a couple of minutes to take a break, go ahead and do so. Take a couple of deep breaths, and when you're ready, come back and join us. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead with introductions.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Lopez. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I received my bachelor's in psychology at Carlos Albizu University and went on to complete my master's at Florida International University. I've been in the field for about 10 years now with Citrus Health, and I currently oversee the parent-child interaction therapy program at Citrus, and I am a level 1 trainer. I'm also trained in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy and in process of certification.
Hi, my name is Emma Munoz. I've been with Citrus Health Network for the past 12 years. I graduated with my bachelor's and master's degree from Florida International University and later went on to getting my license. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I have been trained and certified in TCIT, Teacher-Child Interaction Training Universal. I am also trained and rostered in child-parent psychotherapy. And like Steph is, I'm also in the process of getting certified for TFCBT, trauma-focused child behavior therapy, cognitive behavior therapy. Okay.
So what we have planned to discuss today is what is trauma and toxic stress? What are adverse childhood experiences? How we can help our children heal? What is it that we can do to help them heal? And we are going to cover resources, and towards the end, we will share our contact information.
So what is trauma? The basic textbook definition is that trauma is the response to a deeply distressing or disturbing event that overwhelms an individual. It knocks you off your feet, right? But now we're going to talk a little bit more specific to what is childhood. Right? What is childhood trauma, early childhood trauma? It's more specific to the child's age. We're talking about children from 0 to 5, right? It refers to traumatic experiences that children experience during those ages. Childhood trauma can result from anything that disrupts a child's sense of safety and security. And these include unstable environment, unstable home, separation of parents, serious illness, that of the child or of a close caregiver, any serious surgeries, medical stays that the child or their close caregiver could have experienced, any domestic, physical, or verbal abuse, the child witnessing domestic violence, and or neglect, right? Trauma is abrupt, it's unplanned. There's no time for preparation, which causes a lot of stress in these kids. It's a change in routine. It's a change in their daily routine with caregivers when these experiences occur to them. A lot of times adults carry on with life and experiences and believe that children so young have not been exposed and have not had these experiences, when in reality, the children may have been exposed, right? Children that are young perceive trauma very differently. Perceiving trauma is different from what actually happened, but it doesn't mean that they didn't experience it. Age does not protect them from the experience. When trauma occurs, it creates this physiological and emotional response, that could be it could reoccur later on, right? With triggers, right? When a child is being triggered, it serves them as a reminder of a past experience that happened, a past traumatic experience. It takes them right back to that place, right? They feel anxiety, their palms might get sweaty, they might get a stomach ache. These are all things that they might feel when they're, getting triggered. And what could be some of those triggers that could trigger them? It could be having witnessed an argument, seeing a police car, hearing police officers. This could trigger an emotion, a thought that takes them right back to that moment in time where they experienced that traumatic event, right? It could be a smell, a noise. These could all serve as triggers. Sometimes I know that there's some triggers that we might think that are, that we feel that are obviously positive, right? The smell of your grandmother cooking when you walk into the home. Well, it's the same. That smell brought you back to a place, a moment in time when you remembered. Well, for children, some of these triggers are, when we're talking about trauma, are obviously negative triggers. And it does exactly that. That one smell, it could be a smell of alcohol, takes them right back to that traumatic event that happened to them. Okay. So we're going to talk about some symptoms and impacts of that, trauma or childhood. Traumatic events can evoke powerful emotion in children. It could cause certain reactions. It could look very different from the way an adult reacts, right, to trauma, right? We have children 0 to 5. So what can this look like? They could have an overwhelming sense of terror. They could, have anxiety. And anxiety in children would look like stomach aches, headaches, biting their nails. They could also reenact the trauma through play. This is also something that they might do as children, right? They might feel symptoms may look like hopelessness, right? Irritability, as well as like an actual physical sensation, right? Trembling. They might have issues with their bladder. These might be regression, right? Some children regress when they have experienced trauma. And that looks like children that before were completely potty trained are now having accidents. And we have to ask ourselves, well, what's going on? Why all of a sudden this abrupt, right? This abrupt accidents are happening. What we would like to understand what is happening, right? In the aftermath of trauma, right, the impact, we might see children be more jumpy, hypervigilant. They might be struggling with keeping focus. They might be having constant triggers that, adults might not be aware of. Difficulty sleeping, nightmares, they're very common when children have been exposed to trauma. May be difficult, like I said earlier, to concentrate. Some teachers may interpret this as the child being ADHD, right? Those children that cannot focus and stay put. Actually, what's happening is that they are so overwhelmed by all the trauma that's happening around them that it's enabling them to be able to focus and concentrate and take in information. The understanding of all of these symptoms, taking them in, being aware of them, makes us trauma informed. As teachers, providers, parents, seeing the symptoms present themselves in these manners could make us more aware and how to respond when these symptoms do come up or start showing up. Trauma informed makes us ask the question of, what happened to you? instead of what's wrong with you. You know, why can't you stay still? Why are you having all these, you know, accidents at night? It makes us really understand and become aware and be, you know, sensitive to what the child is experiencing at the time. Now that we have covered trauma, Stephanie's going to go into what is toxic stress.
So before we get into exactly what is toxic stress, let's understand the different levels of stress. So stress is something that is pretty constant in our lives. When we experience just the right amount of stress, it helps us achieve that deadline. There are many different types of positive stress that children experience, like learning a new skill, learning to ride a bike. So even riding a roller coaster, there's that excitement. There is just the right amount of stress to help you achieve that goal. And in positive stress, there is support that is there to help lessen the level of stress and help deal with it. Then we see what is tolerable stress. And tolerable stress can cause a more severe cardiovascular or hormonal response. So what we know about stress is that stress makes our brain release a hormone. Once that hormone is released, then our fight or flight response is activated. So during tolerable stress, that fight or flight is activated. And when that fight or flight is activated, there is the presence of a caring adult who is there to help buffer, to help lessen and teach a child how to healthily cope with the stress, how to cope with it in a healthy manner. And tolerable stresses can be natural disasters, like experiencing a hurricane, as we do so frequently here in Florida. The death of a loved one, that is something that can cause a significant amount of stress in a child. But with the support of a caring adult, a child is able to overcome that. And not just overcome it, but learn new skills and be able to deal with stress in the future in a healthy and positive way. Now, when we're looking at toxic stress, what is different about toxic stress is that there is a prolonged activation of the stress response system, and there is no protection. So the child is experiencing those high levels of adrenaline. The body is responding, so there can be the fast heart rate, the sweating, and feeling like, what do I do with this? How do I respond? How do I come down from this? With support, a child is able to turn off that fight or flight. But without support, it stays on. And that is what is seen as toxic stress. And what is so interesting is that children are more sensitive to this because their brains are just developing. And that is what we want to share with you in this video so that we can fully understand more comprehensively what it is that toxic stress does to a developing mind.
Learning to deal with stress is an important part of healthy development. When experiencing stress, the stress response system is activated. The body and brain go on alert. There's an adrenaline rush, increased heart rate, and an increase in stress hormone levels. When the stress is relieved after a short time, or a young child receives support from caring adults, the stress response winds down and the body quickly returns to normal. In severe situations, such as ongoing abuse and neglect, where there is no caring adult to act as a buffer against the stress response stays activated. Even when there is no apparent physical harm, the extended absence of response from adults can activate the stress response system. Constant activation of the stress response overloads developing systems, with serious lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Over time, this results in a stress response system set permanently on high alert. In the areas of the brain dedicated to learning and reasoning, the neural connections that comprise brain architecture are weaker and fewer in number. Science shows that the prolonged activation of stress hormones in early childhood can actually reduce neural connections in these important areas of the brain at just the time when they should be growing new ones. Toxic stress can be avoided if we ensure that the environments in which children grow and develop are nurturing, stable, and engaging.
Thank you, Stephanie, for that beautiful video. So as you saw in that video, prolonged activation of stress can reduce neurological connections, right? From the age of 0 to 5, our children's brain, as exhibited on this slide, their brain develops 90%, right? So by the age of 5, 90% of their brain has already been developed. So what happens to a child that's exposed to toxic stress is that their brain may not develop the 90% that it needs to, right? They're unable to take in information. They are overwhelmed. They're helpless. They don't have that support. They don't have that safe, enriched environment that they need to thrive, right? So they're going to have difficulties to be able to take in any information, right? It goes from being a learning brain to being a survival brain, right? A brain that is constantly alert, hypervigilant, waiting for threat, and, expecting danger.
Exactly, Emma. And when that brain is on high alert, there are experiences of adversity that the child may be experiencing. And these are what we call ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. An ACE can be a warning light. But what are those ACEs? So it can be physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, household dysfunction, such as a parent or caretaker with mental illness, an incarcerated relative, someone who was in their life and was there present and now all of a sudden has been incarcerated. So the child may have experienced seeing that relative, that person that they care about, being taken to jail, being involved or witnessing the police coming in and taking their loved one, witnessing domestic violence, someone in the family, in the household using substances, and now that person is either too drunk or too high to respond to that child and provide that child with the care and the attention they need. Witnessing or experiencing divorce or parental separation, and those that can be very challenging at times. Children often are very self-centered and might even blame themselves for the divorce. So let's understand a little bit more about where these ACEs came from. It's actually a survey, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey. It came about from a very interesting study that was done back in 1995 between the CDC and Kaiser Permanente. And the study helped shed so much light for healthcare providers and for those responding to the health of our population. What was found was So how they did this, they surveyed more than 17,000 adults, completed that 10-question survey about their adverse childhood experiences. Then they were surveyed on their health concerns. And they were able to see that if a child had experienced before their 18th birthday one of those adversities, they were already 3 times more likely to develop lung disease, 4.5 times more likely to develop depression, 11 times more likely to consume drugs, 2 times more likely for liver disease, and 67% of the population surveyed reported having experienced at least one ACE. I don't know, but that is pretty astounding information. And that leads us to realize that ACEs are more common than we think. But why is it that we don't talk about them as much as we should? Maybe it's because of the stigma around it. Maybe it's because it's taboo. Maybe because it might cause that distress in talking about our experiences and sharing them. But this reality, this number, 67% of those 17,000 adults having at least one ACE, is a number we cannot ignore, and a number that we need to be aware of, because failing to have this knowledge about this is a huge disservice to our children. Whether we are teachers, healthcare providers, parents, caregivers, or providing services to children, we need to have this information present. And that is what Emma was referring to when she was talking about earlier about being trauma informed. Because once we are trauma informed, once we know that having experienced one of these adversities can change how a child develops, and furthermore, it can change the trajectory of that individual's life, their health, then we are able to come in and help lessen. We are able to mitigate and make changes about how we are responding to them. So as a teacher, for example, seeing that child who might be the bully of the classroom, that can help us think, well, what could this child be experiencing at home or outside of the school? Why is that child's fight response activated all the time? Mm-hmm. Now we're able to provide the right support and teach that child the healthy coping skills. What is also a huge advantage is that once we know ACEs and once we know our own ACE score, we are able to prevent. We're able to make a change and do something about it. Because we're able to predict, we already know that these are the lasting impacts of adversity. Now we're able to come in and do something different. We're able to respond more efficiently, and we are more informed. More specifically, let's talk about the trauma of COVID-19. Can it be a trauma, or can it cause trauma? And for everyone, this is different. But for everyone, we are all experiencing this pandemic together. That's what is so unique about COVID-19. It's a shared experience. Even those that we rely on for support, like healthcare providers, psychologists, teachers, everyone is experiencing the same trauma. So talking about it can be a trigger for someone else, because as we're talking about it, it might trigger something in that supportive person. but understanding how it can be impacting to our children, then we can, as I mentioned, provide a more efficient response. We need to be mindful that for children, this experience is completely different as it is for us adults. We have the coping skills. We know what to do to empower ourselves and what we can do to not get sick. And we need to share that with our children. For some children, this experience might bring about grief or loss if they've lost a loved one due to this virus. For some children, this can trigger a past experience. Seeing people walking around wearing masks, seeing the streets emptier than usual. Let's think about the children whom school was their safety net. I love this analogy of an anchor. So let's think of an anchor. A ship is in the midst of stormy waters, and it just needs that one anchor to keep it afloat, to help it navigate that storm. The same goes for our children. They just need one anchor. But if for a child in specific, that anchor was school, and that has been taken away from them, we need to be aware of this. And the more we are aware, the more information we are able to share with others about this topic of trauma, the better we're able to help. Emma, please teach us, tell us how can we help our children heal? What is it that we can do to help lessen the impacts of trauma?
Well, I think the first thing that we need to do is, most importantly is be supportive and understanding. When a child feels that they are supported and understood by their parents, it makes it a little bit easier to handle those difficult feelings that they're experiencing. Most kids will need a period of adjustment, right? Right after that stressful event. During this time, it's important for parents to offer support, love, and again, that understanding. It's nice to keep your schedule. Your schedule and routines is very healthy, right? So it's very healthy for them to stay on those schedules. Let them talk about the traumatic event they experienced. By talking about the event, it allows them to not hold it in anymore. Once you put it out into the universe, right, it takes away this power over you, which is, it's very useful. It's very helpful for that child to be able to speak about the emotions. And it's very important for parents not to force them to speak about their experience. Let them do it at their own time and pace. Also reassure them that their feelings are valid. Validate their feelings. Let them know that you understand what they're going through, that you're there for them. Some children might, like I think I said previously, they might reenact the experience, the traumatic experience in play. Let them do so. This is their way of them communicating with the parents. For those children that don't have vocabulary, that are not able, that don't have that emotional literacy necessary to express their emotions. Tell them that the traumatic event was not their fault. It's very important to let children know that the traumatic experience that they experienced was not their fault. Children at this age are very egocentric, so it's very easy for them the world revolves around them. So it's very easy that they think that they caused something to happen, that they actually have the power to cause things to happen. It's very important to reassure them that it was not their fault, that the traumatic event that occurred, that they witnessed, that they experienced was not their fault. Encourage kids to talk about their feelings, the feelings of guilt. Don't let them blame themselves. Do not criticize, right? It's important not to criticize children. Some may go through regression. And regression, like we said previously, might be wetting the bed again. It's very important not to criticize when this happens after the child has been exposed to trauma. This is a symptom. It's a symptom that we have to recognize, that we are becoming aware of, we're trying to understand. It's also important, if your child has been exposed to trauma, to keep in touch with those caregivers, those providers that are involved in that child's life. It's important to reach out to the teacher, babysitter, and make them aware of symptoms, of the impact that the traumatic event is having on your child, so that they could also respond in a supporting and loving way. In order for adults to be able to heal, assist our children in healing, and help them cope with the experience, with the traumatic experience, we also have to check ourselves as parents, caregivers, teachers, adults. We have to make sure that we are also healing, that we are also understanding our own triggers. I'm going to give you the analogy of, well, I'm going to give you the example of when you go on a plane, right? You go on a plane, you're going to go on a flight, and you have the flight attendant give the initial instructions in case of an emergency. She gets on the speaker, ladies and gentlemen, and goes over the little pamphlet that's in front of you, right? And when she says that the mask, the air mask, is going to drop down in case of an emergency, and the first thing you're supposed to do is place it on your head before you go ahead and help anyone that's next to you. The reason being is that if you don't place it on your head first, by the time you're placing it on someone else, you might not be able to, because you might be too weak, you might have fainted. But the idea is that if you're able to place it on yourself and make sure that you're safe, then you will be able to lend that hand to someone else and be there 110%. You're going to be able to put that mask on them and assist them along the way. We need to have these conversations of awareness, which leads to openness, which leads, like Steph said, to reduce that stigma that's carried with trauma. Trauma is a very heavy word, and talking about it feels heavy on our hearts. You know, sometimes it takes your breath away, and it's hard to talk about. But like I said, the more we talk about it, the more we become aware of symptoms, we become aware of triggers. It helps us help our children navigate those waters.
And by doing all of these amazing suggestions that you have provided us with, then we are able to achieve resilience. By providing our children with the right support that they need, we can help them bounce back, come back from a very stressful situation with a new idea, with new coping skills. We were talking about ACEs, and that's just such a heavy topic because it's just so common, and those experiences are very hard to deal with. But what we want you to know is that your ACE score, how many ACEs you've experienced, is not a destiny. Once we know them, we're able to act differently. We're able to respond, and we're able to empower ourselves as adults to make changes not only for ourselves, for our children. And practicing self-care during this time of COVID is so important, as we have completely developed a whole webinar on the topic of self-care because we recognize the importance of it. Providing yourself self-care is not only beneficial to yourself, but to those that you provide care to. Once we support our children by modeling the healthy coping skills, they're able to learn those, and those skills stay with them throughout all the challenges that life will throw at them, because that we do know for sure. Life is full of challenges. and responding and acting in a healthy way to our own ACEs, we're also able to break the cycle. Our goal is to really achieve for all who are providing services to children, healthcare providers, teachers, to be trauma informed, to know this information in order to be more responsive. One thing that the ACEs survey does not ask is what were all of those positive experiences? And if you put them on a balance, right, the ACEs with the positive experiences, the fact is that the positive experiences can trump those ACEs. That's what is known to us as protective factors, the attachment of positive and healthy relationships with our caregivers, with those around us. And lastly, we want to share with you these amazing resources. There's the 0 to 3, and they share with us a really amazing book called When We Are Scared. It's actually available in English and Spanish. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention has also amazing information, very informative, more information on trauma, ACEs, and traumatic stress. The American Psychological Association, the Child Mind Institute, the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University, the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. These are all really great resources that we used in order to put this presentation together for you. And these resources are also available to you if you are interested in learning more about the ACEs and traumatic stress and toxic stress. And lastly, we want to share our contact information. Again, we are with Citrus Health Network, and we work specifically with the Early Childhood Development Program. Our phone number is on the screen, along with our email for any referrals, any services that may be needed. We do provide trauma-specific services, and those are available in English and Spanish. And also the Early Learning Coalition of Miami-Dade and Monroe. There is their warm line information for services as well. And we hope that this information discussed in this presentation has helped shed some light on these topics that are often very difficult and challenging to talk about, but just conversations that need to be had in order to have better outcomes.
Thank you, Steph. Yeah, and like Steph, I just wanted to add that trauma occurs within a relationship, but it is also within a relationship that it helps you heal. So I hope this, like Stephanie said, that this training has been useful and helpful to you all. Thank you all for participating, for clicking and watching our presentation, and please stay tuned for future webinars that will be provided.
Thank you.
Thank you.